Today we're making Caramelle Di Pasta with some brown butter and pine nuts. And this dish clocks in at 681 calories, 30 grams of proteins, 55 grams of carbs and 38 grams of fat. But if you want a lower calorie dish, you can just skip the nuts and the butter and you will end up with something that's roughly 130 calories less. So to do this, as usual, we're going to make our own pasta dough. For this we're making 2 portions, and that means that we're going to use 140 grams of flour, and we're going to do this with the standard method by creating a well and then adding 1 egg. However, since we're using 140 grams of flour, 1 egg is not going to be enough moisture or liquid. That means that we need to add some water as well. So to do that, we're going to add a little bit at a time, but I actually weighed this out and eventually I got roughly 30 grams of water as well. It will depend on how wet your flour is and a lot of things, but you want a dough that's easy to work with and not dry. So I ended up adding roughly 30 grams of water as well. And I did it later on. So first of all, we're just going to take a fork and just mix in our egg. I usually add some salt to this as well. And once our egg is as mixed in as we can with the fork, we can take a bench scraper and just start chopping in as much flour as we can to the egg as well. Once we're done with that step, we're just gonna go in with our hands and start kneading this, and it's around here that we are gonna notice that we're gonna need a lot more liquid in our pasta dough. So add some water and knead this together until you get a nice smooth dough. The flour I'm using here is 00 and the flour I'm using today is 00, which is fine to make these kinds of caramellos with. And once we have our dough and all of our flour is incorporated, we want to knead this dough for roughly 10 minutes is nice. If you feel a bit lazy, you can always go for 5, but we want to create a nice gluten structure so we are able to roll this dough out as thinly as possible, which means that we need to knead it for a while, and also that we're going to leave this to rest. So roughly 30 grams water used. And while our pasta dough is resting for half an hour, we can make our filling for our caramelle. And to do that, I'm just using my standard ravioli filling, which is 200 grams of ricotta and 30 grams of pecorino. To that we're also going to be adding some nutmeg and lemon zest and also lemon juice. Obviously salt and pepper as well. And finally we're going to add 1 egg to this. Then, once everything is mixed in, all we need to do is just stir that together until it's a nice and fine paste, and put it in a piping bag and then just leave it in the fridge until we're done with our pasta. And this is something I usually make for my kids. They really like it because they can pretend that they're eating candy, so they're happy. They're very happy and always eat everything, so it's a nice dish in that way. So once we have all of our ingredients, just mix everything together, and then we're going to take and then for our piping bag, I like to take a bowl of some sort where you can place your piping bag into and then just scoop everything down there. It makes it so much easier. And then you can always just cut your piping bag a bit in the middle and then just swirl it around, so all your filling will go to the bottom, and it will be very easy to pipe everything later on. And you can either cut it, but I like to use a clamp because it's easier. So just place that in the fridge until we are done with our pasta dough. And for that, I'm just rolling this out using a KitchenAid attachment because it's so much easier, but you can definitely do this by hand if you like. As you might expect, we're gonna start at 1 and then work our way up to 8 this time, because we want our caramels to be fairly thin. So we're gonna go for the finest setting if possible. Since our dough is a little bit sticky today, because we want a fairly wet dough for making this, because we want the pasta to stick together when we roll them, we're gonna flour our countertop or cutting board or whatever you're doing this on. I like to use a cutting board because then you can take one of those pasta cutters and get a nice pattern in your pasta as well. So we're just gonna cut this to fairly long bits here. And later on we're going to divide them into roughly 3, and here you decide how long you want your caramels to be. And then divide them into 3 parts. And this is actually really easy to make. It takes a little bit of time, but it's not that bad. And as I said, the kids love it. So if you have kids, I highly recommend this. Then we're gonna take our filling and just pipe some of it out. We don't want to go all the way to the edges, because we're gonna pinch those together later on to make them look like candy wrappers. And once that's done, all we need to do is roll these. And once you have rolled them, then you're going to push down on the edges fairly hard and push the filling towards the center. And then just pinch those edges together, forming that classic shape. And it's not more difficult than that. As I said, the dough might be a bit sticky, so place them on a floured plate or countertop or anything while you're making all these so they don't stick. And same thing here, just push those edges up and push them together. You can also push them a bit towards each other to make sure that the filling don't have any air pockets. So you push those edges a bit towards the center. And that's it. Once you've done this for all of them, you might have some filling left. I like to place that in the fridge again, and then while we're plating this, I just like to use that as a base for the plate, so you get some sauce as well. And to have some crunch to this dish, I like to add some pine nuts that I'm gonna salt. I'm not gonna roast them or anything, just add some salt. And then we're going to add, so roughly 20 grams of pine nuts and also 20 grams of butter. And these are not going to be boiling for long, so once you're ready for this, they're going to be boiling for roughly 3 minutes. So we want to place our butter in our pan and start browning that. And then we're going to salt our pasta water as always. And once everything is boiling, we're just going to drop them in. And roughly 3 minutes is all they need, because this is fresh pasta. And it's a good idea to stir the bottom a bit, because otherwise they might stick to the bottom, because that's the hottest part. So in the beginning, just give it a careful stir in there, and that will be fine. And then just pipe out the filling you had left at the bottom of the plate. And I like to spread it out with a spoon as well, just to make it a little bit more even. And once our butter is nice and foamy, we have starting the browning process. I like to go a little bit longer, but you should be careful so you don't burn it and go too much. You know that it's ready when you have that nutty smell. And then just fish out your caramellis and add them to your butter. And here you can either just stir them, or if you want to do the classic way, just shake the pot, but they're somewhat fragile, so if you shake them too hard they might break. Do as you'd like, you can just stir them and that's usually fine. Main thing here is to coat them in that brown butter, and if you get some pasta water in there, that's just fine, and it's actually recommended to add a little bit of pasta water to make it a little bit more saucy as well. So then we're just gonna divide this into two. Sprinkle some pine nuts over on there. Make sure we get all of that butter. And that's it. I really like this. I think it's fun to make, and it's a nice bit of crunch with those nuts. And I hope you try this, and if you do, I hope you enjoy. And thanks for watching.